Hi, I'm here on the St. Johns River up in Jacksonville, Florida.
I'm with Ron Whittingham of Visit Jacksonville.
Not too far for Miami residents. What, it's about an hour plane ride and half a day's drive?
Oh yeah, about 5 or 6 hours. I know I've gone the other direction, but it's not that bad coming up this way either. Traffic's not bad on 95 typically, and a lot to do. I mean, you could find a lot to do here on any given weekend.
Okay, so I'm here today. So what do you have in store for me? What are we going to do?
Well, we're going to see the Timucuan. We have a memorial set up at Fort Caroline, which was really the first Thanksgiving held in the New World, was with the French and the Indians here in Northeast Florida. We're going to do a Segway tour. We're going to see a plantation that used to be here that has a very, very interesting history, owned by a Spanish gentleman who actually married one of the slaves. The amazing thing I tell people is you can be downtown in civilization in downtown Jacksonville, and within 30 minutes you can be out on a kayak or on the Timucuan and think you're back hundreds and hundreds of years.
Oh, that sounds delightful. You know, one thing that you pointed out to me that I thought was great fun was Pete's Bar. And it dates back to Abraham Lincoln, and what Abraham Lincoln signed the permit to
Signed the tavern permit, and it's still on the wall there, which was amazing. And then some of the people that worked there didn't even know that, and we had to show them. I think one of the old patrons said, "Hey, it is on the wall." But yeah, there's a lot of history there. And Hemingway went to Pete's, and some other big writers have written books that took place. This was the film capital of the U.S. before Hollywood.
Oh, that's interesting. Who knew that?
Yeah, a lot of people don't. But what happened was a lot of because of the landscape here and the scenery, they could film jungle scenes, they could film downtown scenes in Jacksonville. They had kind of Keystone Cops kind of shows. And just slowly but surely, Hollywood moved out to California. But at one time, this was it. And also, African-American films that didn't have a lot of stereotyping were produced here back in those days, back in the 20s and 30s. So there's a lot of African-American history and a lot of film history as well.
I think that's amazing. And then there's a lot of history, too, because this is one of the older cities in the United States, isn't it?
Right. A lot of people think of St. Augustine, of course, Ponce de Leon. Right. Not to take away from them, that's a beautiful place. But, yeah, there's a lot of history up here as well.
Well, I'm looking forward to going out and seeing your Jacksonville.
Well, I'm looking forward to it, too.
Come along. We're going to have a great time.
We're on the Mayport Ferry, and we're leaving Jacksonville. We're heading over to Fernandina Beach. We're going to be going to Kingsley Plantation and the Timucuan Preserve.
I'm Katrina Pearson. I'm a park guide here at the Timucuan Preserve. So this timeline just kind of shows Florida history and who was in control of Florida during different periods. This symbol here is used to represent the Timucuans, the American Indian group that was here for hundreds of years. This is an actual artifact that we found of the Timucuans. That's this gorget symbol here. This flag represents the brief French settlement here on the St. Johns River, the Fort Caroline settlement, which was only a little like 15 months, 1564 to 65. This flag here is the Spanish imperial flag. So as you can see, Spain was in control of Florida as far as European powers go for the longest period of time. So we have lots of Spain, lots of Spain. In 1763, what we call here the French and Indian Wars took place. And at that point, Great Britain had taken over Cuba, and Cuba is kind of the jewel of the Spanish Empire at this point. So in order to get that back, they traded Florida for Cuba. So Florida becomes British for this really short period of time until, of course, the American Revolution ends in 1783, at which point part of that treaty that ended the American Revolution, Florida goes back to Spain. So we have another Spanish period here until the United States finally takes over in 1821. And then, as you can see down here, we have a brief Confederate period in 1861, which is the only other period than United States, which finishes out the timeline there.
Hello, I'm Emily Palmer. I'm a park ranger here at the Timucuan Preserve's Kingsley Plantation. Here, our site tells the story of Spanish Annabelle in Florida, a story of freedom and slavery, because here Anna Kingsley and Zephaniah Kingsley, a mixed race couple, owned and enslaved over 100 people in the largest collection of tabby slave quarters anywhere. Spanish story is a little bit different from the narrative that we've heard traditionally. The story of Spanish slavery consisted of 3 tiers of society: free white people, free black people, and slaves. And so within this society you could have this buffer class. Within that buffer class, someone like Anna Kingsley, who had been born free in Africa, stolen from her family, sold into slavery, purchased in Havana, and had been a Florida slave herself, could find freedom. She was granted her freedom at the age of 18 by Zephaniah, and as a free black woman living in Spanish Florida, she had more rights and privileges than a white woman living in Georgia. The house was built in 1798. It is an amazing example of cracker-style construction. The house was accessible by boat. People came to this island, as it was a proper island, by the riverways, and here we're surrounded by the Intercoastal Waterway, the St. Johns River, the ocean, and the Fort George River. And so this house faces their street just like your house faces yours. It's just for them it happens to be the beautiful Fort George River. Whereas the last thing you would have seen during the plantation era were the slave cabins and the fields. Today the first thing you see are those fields, the former fields, and the slave quarters, and that really reverses the emphasis. That tells the story of what makes this site special is not just one owner or one family, but the story of many families who lived in those slave quarters, who persevered and thrived and survived a horrible condition. Behind us is the sweeping semicircle of tabby slave quarters that cap off your visit to Kingsley Plantation. Here you can wander through and imagine the lives of enslaved men, women, and children. This fireplace would have been not only the kitchen of the slave quarter, but their light source, their heater. Within this small bedroom, a whole family would have slept on the hard tabby floor, covered only by a small, thin mattress of Spanish moss. Tabby is that shell concrete made from cooking oyster shells, mixing it with sand and water, and creating a chemical reaction. It can be then poured like concrete and made up the walls and so many of the other buildings here at Kingsley Plantation.
What I'm holding in my hand here are the oyster shells. These oyster shells were made in the construction of the slave quarters, plus also the flooring, which they call tabby flooring. I think it's very interesting how everybody uses the materials at hand to make the flooring. So out of this, they get to eat the oyster, then they have the shell, they build their dwelling, they have a nice floor. Pretty cool.
A slave driver on the plantation was in charge of doling out tasks in the morning, was given an extra level of responsibility among the enslaved people, and for that they were rewarded with a larger cabin. So you illustrates a society within the enslaved people themselves.
This is the tabby stone. This is how they did the walls. I know it was a long time ago, but this is so beautiful. I would love to have this in a home today. Look how beautiful it is, and all the composition and the texture on the wall.
Here it's called Kingsley Plantation not only because of their unique story, but because most of the buildings date back to their era. While they were here, the main cash crop was Sea Island cotton, a long fibered luxury cotton, although they did grow indigo, some sugar cane, other crops for subsistence. In fact, the area between where we stand right now and the slave quarters are over there would have been the gardens. Everything produced on this island was for consumption, basically, other than the main cash crop. Bowl off the husk, you can see how sharp the husk of the Sea Island cotton is, but the cotton itself has these long, luxurious fibers that made it a luxury product. It was lovely against the skin. You could use it for lace and fine ladies' clothing as long as you didn't destroy those fibers. The Sea Island cotton had to be ginned either using a roller gin or by hand in order to preserve those delicate fibers. You want to get the seeds out as cleanly as possible. Cotton left on the seed is cotton not making money for the owner. So Kingsley Plantation was owned by their family until they were forced to flee, heading down to Haiti after this had become part of the United States. It transfers through several hands until the Civil War changes history on this plantation, as there is no longer a plantation. It's then owned by the Rollins family, who establish orange groves and call it the Homestead. It becomes a club in the 1920s and eventually a National Park Service site. What makes the Timucuan Trail Parks and the Timucuan Preserve so unique is that it's such a collaborative effort of city, state, and federal lands to protect as much of this beautiful 46,000 acres and part of this amazing story we can tell about Northeast Florida.
Hi, welcome to Timucuan Ecological and Historic Preserve here in Jacksonville, Florida. We have 46,000 acres of marshland, upland, islands, and waterways for you to enjoy. We're going to take a short boat ride on the Fort George River, down to the Intracoastal Waterway, to the St. Johns River, over to Fort Caroline National Memorial. We're pulling up to the Fort Caroline National Memorial dock, and we're going to get off here and talk to Ranger Dan about the story of Fort Caroline and the Huguenots. The Huguenots are French Protestants who came to this area of Florida in 1562, seeking religious freedom, a new colony outside, away from the Catholic France.
We are at Fort Caroline National Memorial inside the fort exhibit. There were problems going on in Europe, in France. They were complex problems. So they were religious, political, economic. This was a time of discovery. So the French decided that they might try and get on board with the Spanish and create a colony here, what is today North America. So they attempted to establish a colony in this part of Florida. It was in 1562 that Jean Ribault, a famous French admiral, attempted to bring the colonists here, what he called the River of May, which today we call the St. Johns River. He called it the River of May because it was May 1st, 1562. So they met the Timucuan Indians. Those were the native people that were here at the time. They got along with them fairly well and tried to establish this colony. Unfortunately, the Spanish learned of this French attempt. The Spanish were already here in southern Florida, so the king decided to send Menendez to Florida to rid this territory of the French, because they were concerned about the French establishing a colony and then attacking their fleets that were coming down along the coast of Florida to South America, the big gold shipments. So not only were the French Huguenots or Huguenots, Protestants, which was not the entire colony, but most of the colony were Protestants. The Spanish, of course, were Catholics. So they had a number of reasons to rid this part of Florida of the French. So the Spanish established St. Augustine under Menendez. They eventually came and attacked the French, wiped out the French here, Fort Caroline, and that's pretty much the story. Unfortunately, Jean Ribault, about the same time in September of 1565, with his fleet was attempting to attack the Spanish first. Unfortunately, being September, which is hurricane season, they ran into a terrific storm, probably a hurricane. The fleet became destroyed and shipwrecked somewhere, we think, around Canaveral National Seashore today in Florida. The survivors attempted to make their way back to Fort Caroline. Menendez met them at a place that we now call Matanzas, which is also a National Park Service site. Matanzas means place of slaughter. I like to sometimes say that this is a story about failure. An interesting story I can tell you, lots of times when we do these programs with school children, they realize, I often get questioned when they hear the whole story. I might end the program by asking, so who won? You know, was it the Timucua Indian? Was it the Spanish? Was it the French? And most of them are pretty sharp, you know. They'll figure out, well, nobody really won. And every once in a while I'll get a precocious fourth grader who will say, you know, if they had learned to get along, if the Spanish and the French and the Timucuan, we might have had the beginnings of the United States of America, which I think is a profound realization to make. So I think that's the lesson. We often say, you know, we should study history because we learn from history. And I think that's the lesson that we learn here by this failure of the French and the Spanish and the Timucuan Indians to share the resources, to live within freedom of religion, etc.
Okay. Come on. Okay, lean forward. I don't want to hit you. Lean forward, and then upright, and then just a little backwards. And then we go a little lean forward. Okay, yeah, anybody can do this. This is great fun. The left? No, I'm going to the right. Okay. Oh, this is totally cool. Yes, anyone can do this, I think. Yes.
You're going to step straight down like that, yes? And then
And
go
then
ahead
I
and tap the button.
Tap the button.
Here you
Done. Thank you for your help. I do appreciate
go.
it.
You're more than welcome.
Hi, I'm Donna Runyon here at Kayak Amelia. We're going to take you on the segways today on the trails here at Fort George Island Cultural State Park within the Talbot Island State Park system. So welcome to Fort George Island, guys. This is a historical cultural park here. The Timucuan Native Americans were living here for over 6,000 years. We've had the plantation days here. Kingsley Plantation was here over 200 years ago. We also have our beautiful Rabot Club here. The Rabot Club was originally designed and built in 1928 by one of Rockefeller's personal architects. Of course, you guys know Rockefeller pretty much left his mark everywhere in the United States he went. Here in this maritime hammock, we have our live oaks and our water oak trees, and what you see, the gray fuzzy stuff hanging in the trees as many of the kids come out, that's how they describe it. That's a Spanish moss. Funny thing is that it's not Spanish and it's not a moss either. Actually a sign of a really healthy ecosystem. So we're lucky to have all this Spanish moss here. Now it's really not harmful to our trees. It's not stealing nutrients from the trees, but there are 2 times that it can kind of hurt it. If we look up here at this tree, we can see where the moss starts to cover the green leaves. And when that happens, those leaves don't get the sunlight that they need to photosynthesize. So that can be harmful to the tree. Yes, this gopher tortoise, he gets that name because he does burrow underground just like a gopher. And they're one of only 2 tortoise species found in North America. What they do is they burrow underground. They use those front claws and they'll dig a hole about 7 to 10 feet. They'll dig a hallway and then they dig out a living room just above the water line. And they don't do this as a water source. These guys really don't drink water. They get all the hydration they need from their vegetation. They really do this above the water line for climate control. When they go down in that burrow in the summertime, it'll stay about 82, 84 degrees. And in the wintertime, it'll get no cooler than maybe the mid-50s.
Hi, my name is Allison Conboy. I'm a Park Services Specialist at Talbot Island State Parks. It is part of the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, and we manage over 7 different state parks in the area. This beach is really unique because we have lots of big oaks and cedars and pines that were once part of this beautiful maritime hammock forest, but over years of wave action and wind energy, they've actually eroded down into the shoreline, and we have a 20-foot bluff. So now we have these huge skeletons of old trees just lining our beach. And due to the effects of the sun and the sand and the waves, they look like large skeletons lying on our shoreline. So we're here at Amelia Island State Park, and we're actually on the south end of Amelia Island, which is an 11-mile barrier island in northeast Florida. And we're here today because there are nesting least terns, which are a threatened species of shorebirds. They come every year to this part of the country and actually nest on the ground. They don't build nests in trees. And because of that, they're susceptible to trampling or intrusion by beachgoers and visitors. So during this sensitive period while they're having their babies, raising their young on the ground, on the sand, we actually will close off a portion of the park to cars and pedestrians, just to minimize any conflicts with visitors and the birds. Nesting least terns are here for, I guess they got here in May and they'll be here till June or July. We have a colony on Amelia Island State Park and then also one across the Nassau Sound on the north end of Little Talbot Island State Park. We also have nesting Wilson's plovers. As you can hear, these terns are a very vocal and aggressive nesting bird. Along the shoreline, you often see sanderlings. They're small sandpipers and they run in and out of the waves. And they're feasting on little marine invertebrates or the donax, those little clams. And they don't mind the fishermen at all. Neither do the laughing gulls, who will often stand right next to them as they cast their lines, hoping to catch a shrimp tail. I love this area because it is just really unique and wild. You know, you feel like you're out of any sort of development. You're in these beautiful giant oak forests, or you know, you're underneath a longleaf pine tree out in the sandhill. It just, you can feel like you're miles away from the city even though you're still pretty close.
Morning, everybody. I'm Captain Tom Benet of the Seahorse. Seahorse Cruises and Charters are here today to take a trip down the river. There'll be a lot of wildlife out there. Looking forward to taking you all along. Called the ICW, Intercoastal Waterway, and it's inside. It's basically a waterway designed for commercial traffic and also yacht traffic coming and going north-south. Primarily, all the way from Key West all the way to you get to the Great Lakes or up to New York or wherever you want to go, and it's inside, and it's protected water is what it really is. And of course, you can go out in the ocean through the inlets anywhere along the ICW. In other words, you don't have to stay in the ICW. You can run out in the ocean if you choose to. They're trying to get some legislation passed, state of Florida, and then of course Washington too, funds that will dredge the channel and make it deeper so bigger ships can come and go out of Jacksport. And that would, they feel, improve the economy in Jacksonville and Florida in general. Right now the ships are large, but there's larger ones that could come in if it were deeper. And there's some dolphins. They will get out of the way of the boat. You don't have to worry about them. Dolphins normally won't come up to park boats as much as they will the moving boats, and they'll stay with the boat. They can swim very fast. I've been out in the ocean with the boats and going along at 10, 15 knots, and they just stay right with the boat. So if they don't want to be with you, they won't be, but if they want to be with you, they will. In other words, the dolphins we went by, if they wanted to stay with us, they would have. We can't stop and stay with them. They do what they want to do.
You know what's beautiful about being in Florida and Florida waters? There's so many places to go. There's so much shoreline.
Oh, there is.
So it's always exciting. You never know what you're going to see. I especially enjoyed the dolphins we saw and then the bird life. But what's nice up in this area, there's very little boat traffic. So we kind of have the whole area to ourselves, which is totally cool. So now we're going to pay attention because we're heading into some traffic.
My name is Amber Sesnick, and we're at the Cummer Museum of Art and Gardens in Jacksonville, Florida. The museum opened in 1961 and was founded by Arthur and Nina Cummer, a local family who ran a lumber business. It was part of the bequest from Mrs. Cummer to tear down her home and build a building in the Art Deco style to house her collection. In front of Nina Cummer, she founded the museum with the intent to house American and European art collections. It began with about 50 pieces from her personal collection, along with her gardens, which are over 100 years old. Right now we are in the Tudor room, which was originally Mrs. Cummer's sitting room. All of the items in the room were taken from her original home and reassembled back in the museum space. We regularly have about 15 galleries on display, ranging from ancient through contemporary art collections with special exhibitions that change periodically throughout the year to supplement our permanent collection. Now we are in the Lovett Gallery that holds our collection of early 18th century Meissen porcelain tableware. It is the third most prominent collection of its kind in the world and the most prominent within the United States. We're in the Cummer Gardens right now. The garden sits on the St. Johns River. Behind me is the English Garden, which was the first garden that Mrs. Cummer had designed. It was designed by Thomas Meehan and Sons in 1910. The gardens also include an Italian garden that was designed by Ellen Beadle Shipman in 1931, and the Olmsted Garden, which is an American garden and was designed in 1931 by the Olmsted Brothers firm. Many of the trees on the property were here when the gardens were designed and were incorporated into the design, including a 200-year-old live oak tree, which has a span of 175 feet.
You might be wondering why I'm touching this beautiful work of art. Well, this is touchable art. It's all reproductions. You can come in here, you can touch it, interact, and have a great time. This is a fun destination. It's only a day's drive from Key Biscayne.
Welcome to Jacksonville, Florida. We're up here in Northeast Florida, and this is the largest city in the continental United States of America. General Andrew Jackson is the gentleman after whom our city has been named. He was a wonderful military leader in 1814, having beaten the British in the Battle of New Orleans. Our next stop takes us to the top of the Bank of America Tower. We go to the 42nd floor, where guests enjoy a view of the 841 square miles that make up our city of Jacksonville.
Welcome to the secret tunnel of downtown Jacksonville.
We then head down into our underground banking tunnels. These were secret tunnels that were kept private by the banks that began their headquarters here in Florida back in the early 1900s. We had headquarters for 3 of the biggest banks here in Florida at the time. We go inside the old Atlantic National Bank building and down into their old banking tunnel and enjoy our vault. The procedure was everything's got 2 locks, and you see it on the deposit boxes, on the big vault door, on the vault that's outside. It was security. Jacksonville was the first Hollywood. Yes, we actually had 26 movie companies making movies here in Jacksonville. And we share with our guests a silent movie called Bouncing Baby. Then we head over to the jewel of our tour, the Florida Theater. It's a 1920s fantasy movie theater palace. They showed silent movies as well as regular movies. They also showed stage productions as well. They can seat about 1,900 patrons. Jacksonville City Fire is the 3rd biggest city fire that we had here in the United States. 1901. May the 3rd, Friday, super dry. This Spanish moss hanging down from our oak trees. We processed it at the Cleveland Fiber Factory. It was on a drying rack. It was lunchtime. All the workers had gone home for their lunch. And a little spark got from a shanty fire, and it got lifted by the wind. It was super windy, hadn't rained in quite some time, very dry. Got onto the drying rack. This ignited. Wind picked up the sparks, put it on top of the factory's roof. The roof caved in, and then when all those embers went up, the wind just blew it. And this is what happened to our city. 8 hours gone. Almost 10,000 people homeless. Extremely devastating. 146 city blocks. But out of the tragedy came amazing wealth and creation and ingenuity and caring from our citizens and the people who came here. Henry Clutho read about our fire up in New York in the paper. He was down here in the next month. What better place to go than a city that's burned down for an architect to come and begin his career down here? So he made his mark down here on our blank canvas. We didn't lose a lot of lives, only 7 people. 5 of them jumped into the river to get away from the flames and drowned in the river. It wasn't even the fire that took their lives. So when we rebuild, now we're using modern construction materials. We're using steel, concrete, fireproof construction, no more wooden roofs, shingles. So now we have the most modern city. Thank you, Key Biscaynes, and we look forward to having you up here in Jacksonville to see what we're all about.